Every time you bring up the fact that the West isn't perfect, you're sort of doing what the woke college students are doing.
So Steven Pinker went on the Triggernometry podcast. You know Triggernometry with Konstantin Kisin. I couldn't tell you the other guy's name. I don't think anyone really knows what it is. They're like these two failed comedians who have figured out how to do the heterodox podcast grift, where essentially in the name of free speech, in the name of being anti-censorship, in the name of having the real difficult nuanced conversations, you end up just being open to conspiracy theories and uncritically repeating right-wing talking points. Whether or not they know they're doing that, I'm not sure, but I think they do know that their click revenue, their ad revenue, their popularity, the size of their audience grows in proportion to them being willing to do that particular shtick. So anyway, Steven Pinker makes his appearance on this show, and they really try to get him into the difficult conversation about the meaning crisis, right? And about how maybe in order to save the West and save Enlightenment values, we need to return to Christianity.
People talk about there being a crisis of meaning and a crisis of purpose. Do you recognize that as a thing that exists?
We recognize that people say that.
Yes.
But that there are enormous opportunities for meaning and purpose, namely improving human well-being on a global scale. That if we made people richer and healthier and longer lived and with better experiences and more knowledgeable, safer, less likely to get killed in wars and genocides and street crime, what's so meaningless about that?
From an empirical perspective, if people are getting richer and safer, and yet they feel more like they're drifting more and they're more alienated and less connected to others, etc., which is the flip side of some of the technological progress that we're going through. Wouldn't that be evidence for the fact that perhaps the human condition is incapable of simply enjoying constant improvement and needs some kind of struggle and fight or whatever that might be?
Well, it is true that we tend to pocket our gains and forget and fail to appreciate them. Even if we do, it's still better than that if a child doesn't die before the age of 5.
Okay, so what we hear Steven Pinker doing there is basically reiterating a familiar argument that the Enlightenment was good, that what happened in the West since the Enlightenment has ultimately been good on a large scale, right? When we look at it big picture, the progress of science, the improvement of medicine, what's happened in terms of democracy and separation of church and state, getting free from monarchy, getting free from theocracy, ultimately these have been better for more people than what we had before. A lot of people on the left have an issue with him. They think that he's a Western chauvinist. They think that he is defending capitalism in some way, or that he ignores the reality of imperialism and America's wars of aggression. I don't think that's really a fair criticism, but I get where they're coming from, and I get why that stuff is important as well. I just don't think he's denying that or really talking about that in terms of this big picture analysis. But that's a conversation for another day. And in fact, one of the things you'll see him get into in this conversation is how Western chauvinism is really a bad thing, and he's opposed to it, and that Enlightenment values are good wherever they come from. So in this next clip, you see something really important as well. You see Konstantin Kisin trying to make the case that Donald Trump is a better option in terms of saving Western civilization and allowing the ideas of the West to maintain their position as being top dog in the world, and that he prefers Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. And what Pinker does is the appropriate pushback on these heterodox right-leaning thinkers, which is to say, oh, no. Actually, the threat to Enlightenment values comes not only from Vladimir Putin, it comes from Donald Trump too, because they actually love one another, and they're actually part of this bigger trend that you guys actually don't talk about very well, and I'm editorializing that, which is global right-wing populism and nationalism, which is a big threat not only to liberal democracy, but to the stability of the world that has been hard won, I would add, since World War II. We have things like NATO, which Donald Trump doesn't think we should really participate in.
What I'm saying is, if the West is not top dog in the world, the values you care about so much will not be the predominant values of the world.
Depends on which Western values, too. I mean, Donald Trump is up. He's
I prefer Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin.
Well, I do, but they love each other. So they're part of it. There's a sense in which they are part of promotion of nationalism, of populism, of investing power in a strong, charismatic leader as opposed to the democratic process. So it's that idea that concerns me, rather than let's make sure that the West predominates.
Every heterodox, useful idiot for the right needs to hear what Pinker says next. He agrees with Kissin on the importance of Enlightenment values, but notice why.
Yeah, well, I would completely agree.
You'd agree with that. Okay.
Because it's the values that count. And indeed, it would be obtuse to deny that those values are way stronger in the West, however you define the West, including gender equality and gay rights and democracy and, just anything that we want to venerate as a value. There's more of it in the United States than in Iran or in Russia or in China. And so, hooray for us for championing those values, but it's the values rather than the kind of Western chauvinism.
Us versus everybody else. Got it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think my friends who critique Pinker from the left need to hear this as well, because Pinker's giving a good account of himself, right? He's saying that what is so valuable about liberal democracy and about Enlightenment values is their progressive tendency to move in the direction of greater freedom and equality and to protect minorities. And what's going on the right now, and what the heterodox sphere ends up being a mouthpiece for, is this anti-woke ideology that says any of those actual Enlightenment values in terms of their outputs around women's rights and gay rights and civil rights, right? Ending institutionalized racism, that's all part of what is corrosive to Western civilization. And that's exactly upside down. And I'm just watching Konstantin Kissin's face as he listens to Pinker do this. And I enjoy it. So now we get to the Nietzschean statement that God is dead. And in his footsteps, the Jordan B. Peterson statement that the Enlightenment was wrong and that we're in this meaning crisis. Oh, the meaning crisis, because we've lost touch with our traditional Christian roots and traditional family values. And of course, along with that comes traditional gender roles and all of the other grab bag of anti-woke stuff that these folks want to advance.
Was life better before the Enlightenment? And there were wars of religion that killed people by the tens of millions. Life expectancy was 30. Land heretics were burned at the stake. A third of children did not live to see their fifth birthday. Routine forms of sadistic corporal and capital punishment, like disemboweling and breaking of the wheel. I think that wasn't so great.
I think you'd agree with that. I don't think he's saying technological progress and science are wrong.
It's not just technological progress. To blame the 20th century on, first of all, the death of God assumes that there was a God to kill in the first place. So the death of God is highly misleading. It's a very Nietzschean way of putting it. But a secular understanding of morality, that it doesn't come from scriptural commandments that tell you to stone adulteresses and to commit genocide against your enemies, but rather from universal human well-being, is a moral advance.
The thing that is amazing about what has happened with these heterodox folks is that we've gone from new atheism, which over the course of, 10 years, thoroughly prosecuted all of the rational arguments against religious apologetics, including, but where do you get your moral values from if you don't believe in God, right? If you don't have a holy scripture that was dictated by some divine authoritarian ruler that can tell you what's right and wrong, how are you to know? Surely you'll just be murdering, raping, and pillaging unless you are committed to some kind of religious metaphysics. Where else could ethics possibly come from? Like, that has been thoroughly debated already by the precursors of these. If you track the history back in terms of the YouTube genealogy, like, that's where these people come from. That's where this idea of having open conversations comes from. Don't try to censor me with your sort of religious taboo against questioning these very, very bad ideas about what it means to be human, about the nature of reality, about where we get our moral values from. And yet we've come full circle now, where someone like Konstantin Kisin from the Triggernometry podcast is just going to sit there and say, but I don't understand where you get your moral values from in a secular sense. And Pinker's not having it. All right, everyone, that is my analysis. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know in the comments below if you did, if you agreed with me, if you thought I was full of it. I'm open to the conversation. Please hit like and subscribe if you would. It really helps us. And, if you want to see more videos like this, stay tuned. And also let me know. Let me know who you might be interested in seeing me cover. I find this phenomenon of what's happened in the sort of independent digital media space in terms of how over the last, 8 years, it's been trending more and more to the right, more and more towards conspiracism, more and more, as it turns out, towards a reactionary kind of Christian way of looking at things as part of deconstructing wokeness. I think it's really, really interesting to look at and break down. So hopefully you do too.